Imagine waking up in the middle of the Sahara, not the endless desert you know today, but a land of green rivers, wildflowers and thunderclouds. Elephants graze where dunes now rise, hippos splash where only sand remains. And somewhere out there, beneath your feet, lies a secret older than any scripture ever written. What if this was the real Garden of Eden? I know, it sounds insane. The driest place on earth, paradise. But thousands of years ago, the Sahara was alive. Lakes shimmered, forests stretched for miles, and ancient people built homes where now only wind survives. So tonight, dim the lights, turn on a fan for that soft desert breeze, and let's go back, way back, to when the Sahara still had rivers, and Eden hadn't yet been lost, just buried under the sand. Before it was a furnace of sand, the Sahara bloomed, grasses swayed, rivers carved silver ribbons through the valleys, and rains painted everything in impossible shades of green. The desert we know today was once a savanna paradise, a land of lakes, trees, and thunderstorms that rolled for days. Close your eyes for a moment and try to imagine it. Not the blinding dunes and ghostly heat mirages we picture now, but a world humming with life. Herds of antelope moved like living clouds across the plains. Crocodiles basked on muddy banks. The air was thick and alive, heavy with rain, and buzzing with the kind of mosquitoes that would have made even the gods consider moving to a drier climate. The year, roughly 10,000 BCE, give or take a few millennia, because calendars were still in beta testing. The Ice Age had just released its chilly grip, and the Earth tilted ever so slightly, altering the path of the monsoon. What had once been barren land began to breathe again. Rain fell for centuries, carving lakes the size of small seas. The Sahara was reborn. It's hard to believe now, standing in what looks like a sand-blasted wasteland, that this was once one of the most fertile places on the planet. Scientists call it the African humid period, but that makes it sound like a minor inconvenience, like the Sahara just needed a towel. In truth, it was an age of abundance so lush it bordered on myth. Rivers cascaded from highlands, animals gathered by the thousands, and vegetation spread in waves of green that stretched from the Atlantic to the Red Sea. You would have woken up to the sound of frogs croaking in the reeds and the smell of wet soil after a storm. There were trees taller than anything the modern desert could dream of: acacia, tamarisk, and fig, whose roots reached deep into the soft ground. The air shimmered not with heat but with humidity. It clung to your skin like silk. If you had lived here, you wouldn't have called it the Sahara. You might not have even had a word for desert. To you, this was simply home, a vast, warm garden where the earth seemed endlessly generous. Water was everywhere. Fish darted through clear shallows. Birds nested in droves. It wasn't just survivable. It was comfortable, the kind of place where you could build a fire, cook something unidentifiable but probably delicious, and complain about the rain being too loud. And yet, even in paradise, time whispers of change. You can almost feel the slow rhythm of the planet beneath your feet, the subtle shifting of skies and seasons. Somewhere far away, the Earth's axis tilts a fraction. It's imperceptible to you, but the rains notice. The monsoon begins to weaken. The Great Lakes start to shrink. Inch by inch, the soil, once soft and dark, begins to dry. But for now, the Green Sahara is still alive. Communities of early humans, herders, fishers, painters of rock walls, thrive here. They build camps beside the lakes and carve images of their lives into stone. Giraffes, cattle, hunters, women dancing beneath the rain. They are telling you, across thousands of years, that this place was real. That paradise once had a postcode. The funny thing about the Green Sahara is that it didn't vanish overnight. It lingered teasingly for thousands of years. Each generation watched the grass recede a little more, the rivers slow to a trickle, the sky turning stingier with its rain. No one would have known they were witnessing the slow death of Eden, not until the day they woke up and found the lakes gone. So, as you lie back tonight, imagine the rain falling where dunes now rise. Imagine thunder echoing where silence reigns. The Sahara, you know, is sleeping, but beneath the sand, the memory of that green world still breathes, a buried Eden waiting for the sky to change again. Picture this: hippos lounging in the middle of what's now an endless sand sea. Their laughter, yes, hippos laugh, echoing across lakes where camels now trudge. Fossils tell us this place wasn't barren at all. It was a zoo before the apocalypse. If you were to stand in the middle of the Sahara 10,000 years ago, you'd have to watch your step, not because of scorpions, but because of hippos. Massive, mud-slicked, mildly homicidal hippos. They were the undisputed landlords of the wetlands that once rippled across the desert. Their world was one of thunderclouds, tall grass, and the sound of water slapping against stone. Crocodiles drifted lazily through the reeds. Flamingos paraded through shallow lagoons. Fish darted in clear waters that stretched further than the eye could see. The air would have been heavy, thick with humidity, the smell of wet clay, and the unmistakable aroma of hippo droppings. Not exactly Chanel No. 5, but it meant life. The Sahara wasn't a desert then. It was a kingdom of creatures. Giraffes grazed among acacia trees, elephants trundled through the forests, and lions prowled the edges of lakes. Even the insects seemed to have ambition. Dragonflies the size of dinner plates and mosquitoes that could probably file taxes. And here's the strangest part. All this happened in the very same place that today can fry an egg on a rock in 10 seconds. Beneath the dunes that now shimmer with heat, there are bones, millions of them, fossils of fish, shells from freshwater snails, even crocodile skulls. Some are found hundreds of miles from the nearest water source, like postcards from a world that shouldn't exist. If you dig deep enough in the Sahara, you're not excavating sand, you're peeling back time itself. Satellite imaging has revealed the ghosts of ancient rivers flowing beneath the dunes. These long-dead waterways, some wider than the Thames, once fed vast lakes like Chad, which at its peak could have swallowed all of modern France. Picture it, waves gently lapping under a sky streaked with lightning, trees bending in the wind, herds drinking side by side with predators too lazy to kill when the water was plentiful. In that world, you'd have woken to the sound of birds, not silence. You might have watched clouds drift overhead, their reflections rippling across lakes that are now nothing but mirage. The Green Sahara was a living planet, tucked inside a continent, a reminder that desert and life are just different moods of the same earth. It's almost funny to think about. Today, tourists cross the Sahara on camelback, praying for shade, while thousands of years ago, hippos were having pool parties in the same spot. Nature has a sense of humor. It just works in geological punchlines. But as with every good party, there's a hangover. Slowly, the rains began to fail. The lakes started shrinking, quietly at first, then dramatically. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing your lake has turned into a puddle, and the crocodiles are giving you looks. The animals began to move, following the receding water. The hippos trudged south, leaving their footprints in mud that would soon harden into stone. Fish died in shrinking pools. The reeds turned brittle. To the people living there, it must have felt apocalyptic. The rivers that had fed them for generations were disappearing. The laughter of hippos faded into memory, and yet life persisted, in stories, in art, in fossils buried deep beneath the dunes. The Sahara we see now, this ocean of emptiness, isn't lifeless. It's haunted. Every grain of sand is a fossilized raindrop, every dune a memory of thunder. Beneath all that silence lies an echo of splashing water, of wind in tall grass, of hippos, wide-mouthed and happy, ruling the world's unlikeliest paradise. And when you look at the desert today, shimmering in the heat, it's hard not to think it's laughing still, a low, distant chuckle, remembering the time it was a kingdom of water. Sahara with life. Rivers spread like veins, feeding forests and people alike. Humanity didn't just survive here, it thrived. You can almost hear it, the first rain in centuries falling on dry earth. The sound is soft at first, like a whisper. Then it grows bolder, louder, turning into a roar that sweeps across the land. Water fills the gullies, carving streams where there was once only dust. Grasses spring up overnight, and the air turns heavy with that intoxicating smell of wet soil. Petrichor, the scent of rebirth. The Sahara begins to bloom. It's not just weather, it's a revolution. The great monsoon, pushed northward by the wobble of Earth's orbit, transforms an entire continent. The barren plains of North Africa become a green heartland, an ecosystem so fertile that lakes the size of small seas appear almost out of nowhere. Lake Chad sprawls across what is now 4 countries, and other basins shimmer like mirrors in the sun. This was not the Sahara you know. This was Africa's forgotten Eden. For the first time, people stop wandering and start staying. Why chase food when it walks right into your camp? Herds of gazelle and antelope graze in the distance. Fish leap in the shallows, and the rain, the endless, generous rain, fills every hollow. Villages spring up along the rivers. Fires burn at dusk. Children laugh in languages lost to time. Humanity's oldest habit, complaining about the weather, probably begins here. Too much rain, not enough rain, always rain. The people of this green world are ingenious. They carve fishing hooks from bone, build huts of reeds, and learn to shape clay into pots. They start to herd cattle, which, if we're honest, is humanity's first long-term bad decision. You think walking your dog is tough? Try walking a prehistoric cow through knee-deep mud while hippos glare at you from the water. But for these early herders, it was worth it. Cattle were wealth, status, food, and faith, all rolled into one lowing, smelly package. The rain doesn't just make food, it makes memory. When you live in a land that transforms every time the sky opens, you start to believe the heavens have moods. The people of the green Sahara begin to worship the rain, to sing for it, to paint it on cave walls, to bury offerings in the wet earth. Water becomes sacred, the heartbeat of the world. They don't build temples of stone, they build them out of gratitude. The rivers grow wide and deep, connecting lakes like silver threads. Some are so vast that you could sail for days without losing sight of the shoreline. Imagine that, standing in the middle of what we call desert, watching lightning dance on a horizon of water. There are storms that make the night glow electric blue, winds that bend trees sideways, and floods that reshape the land. It's both terrifying and divine. But all gifts come with a catch. The monsoon is fickle, generous one century, stingy the next. There are years when the lakes swell and fish flop onto the shores, others when the rain fails and cracks crawl across the ground. The people begin to notice the cycles. Long before meteorology was a thing, they carve patterns into rock, mapping the stars, tracking the heavens, perhaps hoping to predict when the rain would return. The first scientists, armed with intuition and a good sense of timing. For a few thousand years, it works. The Sahara is a paradise that sustains millions of lives. It's the first act in humanity's long romance with water, a reminder that every civilization begins beside something that flows. But beneath the surface, the earth is already shifting again. The orbit tilts, the air warms, and the rains hesitate. The veins of paradise begin to dry. And yet, for a brief, perfect window in time, the Sahara was not a desert at all. It was a kingdom, not of gold or power, but of water, a realm ruled by the rhythm of the sky, where the true sovereign was the rain itself. Long before the pyramids, people built homes beside these lakes. They fished, they painted, they worshipped the rain. Archaeologists call them the Neolithic Saharans. You might call them the landlords of paradise. If you were alive then, you'd wake each morning to the low sound of cattle in the grass and the steady rhythm of waves slapping the shore. The air was warm, soft, heavy with mist. You'd step outside your hut, woven from reeds, mud, and hope, and watch the sun rise over a lake that stretched to the horizon. You wouldn't yet know that this was the Sahara. To you, this was simply home, the center of everything. These were not wandering hunter-gatherers scraping out an existence. They were settled, confident, and creative. They made pottery with swirling geometric patterns, polished stone tools to a mirror sheen, and left behind some of the earliest examples of community planning. Their villages formed around lakes like pearls on a necklace, each one a small world of families, laughter, and smoke rising from cooking fires. They lived well. Fish and wild game were plentiful, fruits and roots abundant, and the climate forgiving. If you were part of their world, you would spend your days repairing nets, tending goats, or trading fish for meat and shells from distant tribes. The nights would be filled with conversation, with stories told beneath the Milky Way, a sky so bright and clear that it seemed to be listening. They painted too, on rock faces, on cave walls, on anything that would hold a pigment. You can still see their work today, carved deep into the desert's bones. Hunters with bows, dancers in circles, mothers with children, cattle with long, elegant horns. Some scenes are so intricate that you can see the patterns on their clothes. The colors are soft ochres, reds and browns pulled from the earth itself. Their art was not just decoration, it was devotion, a living diary of the world before it died. Archaeologists have found burials here that tell us how deeply these people cared for their dead. Bodies laid gently in the earth, adorned with beads, necklaces, and shells carried from the distant coast. One site, Gobero in Niger, revealed an entire cemetery preserved under sand. Mothers still cradling their children, arms curved in eternal protection. Death was treated with tenderness, not fear. But they didn't just look inward. These people were connected. Traders, travelers, storytellers. They moved across vast distances, following rivers that no longer exist, linking the Sahara to the Nile and beyond. The genetic fingerprints of their descendants still appear in populations across North and West Africa, a quiet whisper that the desert once bound rather than divided humanity. And then there were the cattle, the heartbeat of their world. They herded them like treasure, feeding and watering them with care. Some scientists even suggest that this was one of the first places where humans domesticated livestock. Imagine the pride in owning a herd, watching the calves grow, the milk flowing, a symbol of stability and wealth. It was their currency, their calendar, and eventually their mythology. You can almost see it, a shaman standing in a clearing, rain clouds gathering overhead, chanting for the spirits to bless the herds. The people clap, the drums echo, and somewhere thunder answers. Religion here was not a temple or a priesthood. It was a conversation with the sky. Yet in their art and bones, there's a hint of awareness, as if they knew paradise wouldn't last. Maybe it was the growing unpredictability of the rains, the lakes shrinking a little more each year, the grass turning brittle too soon. The old people would have noticed first, the ones who remembered when the lake touched the edge of the village and the fish jumped straight into your hands. Still, they stayed as long as they could. They built, loved, prayed, and buried their dead in a world that was slowly dying. But they did not see tragedy in it. To them, this was simply the turning of the earth's great wheel. Today, all that remains of them are bones, beads, and art etched into stone. But if you walk through the desert at dawn, when the air is cool, and the dunes still cast long shadows, you can almost feel their presence. The Neolithic Saharans, the landlords of paradise, may be gone, but their laughter, their firelight, and their songs still hum beneath the sand, waiting for the rain to return. Deep in the desert's caves, ancient murals still breathe. Hunters chasing giraffes, women dancing beside water, even mysterious figures that look almost alien. The walls remember a time the earth itself seemed kinder. Walk far enough into the heart of the Sahara, and the silence begins to hum. The air feels heavy, ancient, like the weight of memory itself. Here, in the shadowed canyons and wind-carved cliffs, the past is still clinging to the stone. You run your hand along a wall, and there it is, the brushstroke of someone who lived 8,000 years ago. Ochre reds, deep browns, soft yellows, colors made from crushed earth and blood. The pigments are still bright because time, it seems, has decided to let these dreams linger. What you're looking at isn't random doodling. It's a library written in stone, the world's first cinema. The scenes are alive, herds of cattle grazing beneath rain clouds, families dancing in circles, hunters with bows raised mid-stride. You can almost feel the rhythm, hear the laughter. These people painted not out of boredom, but out of reverence. Each line is a prayer to remember a world that was slipping away. Some of the most haunting art lies in Tassili Najer, in southern Algeria. Caves there stretch like cathedrals, their walls filled with tens of thousands of figures. There are so many that archaeologists still haven't catalogued them all. The round-head figures, in particular, are the strangest, enormous floating beings with bulbous heads and blank faces surrounded by people in worship. Some have called them gods, others extraterrestrials, or maybe they were something simpler, the first artists trying to draw the mystery of the sky. The painters of Tassili were not just chroniclers of daily life, they were philosophers with paint. They captured not only what they saw, but what they felt, the joy of a hunt, the grief of loss, the miracle of rain after a dry season. Their images pulse with emotion, so much that even now you can sense the awe behind them. They were saying, look at this, look what we had, don't forget. And they didn't just paint people. The walls are filled with creatures that no longer belong to this land. Elephants, rhinos, crocodiles, fish, and birds. The detail is astonishing. You can see muscle, movement, even personality. A giraffe arches its neck like a question mark. A lion prowls with its tail curling just so. Each stroke tells us this wasn't myth to them. This was memory. They lived among these beasts. It's strange, standing there now, surrounded by nothing but sand and silence, and realizing that this was once a paradise, that the desert itself was once a gallery of life. The irony is delicious. The driest place on earth holds the most vivid records of water, and perhaps the most human thing of all is that some of the art isn't about animals or gods at all. It's about each other. You can see mothers nursing infants, friends, sitting in circles, lovers holding hands. One painting even shows what looks like a group swimming, yes, swimming, through a lake that vanished thousands of years ago. It's hard not to smile at that. Even in prehistory, humans were showing off their summer vacations. But there's something deeper hidden in the cracks. As the centuries passed, the subjects of the art began to change. The animals grew fewer, the rain scenes disappeared, the dancers turned into wanderers. Slowly, the green Sahara was dying, and the people could feel it. Their art became quieter, more symbolic, fewer giraffes, more prayers, more longing. Maybe they painted to hold on to what was vanishing. The way you might keep an old photograph on your wall after someone you love has gone. Each stroke was resistance against forgetting, against the coming silence. Today, these murals are fading. Wind and sand scour the paint, erasing the hands that made them. But every so often, a new cave is found, another window into that green, impossible past. When you look at those ancient faces drawn in stone, you can almost imagine them looking back, asking the same question you're asking now. Will anyone remember what we built? And maybe that's what all art really is, a message from the past saying, we were here, in a land that is now nothing but dust and sun. The walls still breathe, whispering of lakes, laughter, and dreams painted in color before the world turned to sand. Flow invisibly beneath our feet, whispering of an age when Egypt's ancestors drank from their waters. If you could peel back the Sahara like a bedsheet, you'd see something extraordinary, a network of ancient riverbeds snaking through the continent like veins in a giant sleeping body. These aren't small streams. Some are wider than the Thames, longer than the Nile. Their shapes are still there, carved deep into the crust of the earth, preserved under millions of tons of sand. They have names now: the Taman Rasset River, the Kufra Basin, the Irhaha, ghost rivers, all of them. Thousands of years ago, they weren't ghosts at all. They were alive, roaring, glittering arteries that linked the heart of Africa to the Mediterranean. The Taman Rasset, for instance, once stretched more than 500 miles, pouring into the Atlantic in a delta as vast as the Amazons. Along its banks, the ancestors of Egyptians and Berbers lived, hunted, fished, and prayed. They didn't build dams or monuments. Their temples were the riverbanks themselves. Today, those rivers are invisible. You can stand right above one, or what's left of one, and see nothing but waves of sand. But if you could listen closely enough, maybe you'd still hear the echo of running water beneath your feet. The desert, for all its silence, is still talking. You just have to know how to listen. The discovery of these buried rivers didn't come from shovels or trowels, but from space. In the late 20th century, scientists began using radar from satellites to scan beneath the dunes. What they found shocked them. Massive networks of river channels hidden just below the surface, perfectly preserved like fossils. It was as if the desert had a secret map folded inside it. The images revealed braided streams, old floodplains, and deltas, the fingerprints of a world that once pulsed with rain and life. Think about that for a second. You're looking at deserts from orbit, and what you find isn't emptiness but memory. It's humbling and a little haunting. Once, these rivers connected the great lakes of the green Sahara to the Nile and beyond. They carried not just water, but stories. Through these corridors of life, people, animals, and ideas moved, from the savannas of Central Africa to the early settlements of the Nile Valley. Every great migration probably followed these paths. Civilization quite literally flowed from here. The Sahara wasn't always a barrier. It was a bridge, a green web tying together the continent before the earth decided to turn off the faucet. But the same cosmic dance that brought the rains eventually stole them away. The monsoon retreated southward, and the rivers began to die. First they shrank into streams, then into puddles, then finally into sand. The people followed the water wherever it went, toward the Nile, toward the coast, toward anywhere that wasn't slowly disappearing. You can almost imagine them standing on a drying riverbank, watching the last trickle vanish, wondering if the gods had simply grown tired. And then the wind came. The dunes moved in like slow, patient waves, burying everything. Lakes, forests, villages, erased without violence, just silence. Nature's cleanup crew, punctual as always. Still, the earth remembers. The Taman Rasset's channel, long dry, still shapes the land beneath Mauritania and Algeria. When rare storms sweep across the desert, water briefly races down these ancient paths again, as if the rivers wake for a few hours each century, just to remind us they're still here. For a moment, the Sahara breathes, and then it sleeps again. If you could see those floods from above, they'd look like veins lighting up. an ancient heart beating one more time before falling quiet. And it makes you wonder, if there are rivers hidden beneath the sand, what else lies down there? Bones? Cities? Memories? Maybe paradise itself, sealed under time's blanket, waiting for the rain to return. Because here's the secret. Deserts are not dead. They're only paused. The rivers beneath the Sahara are not gone. They're dreaming, waiting for the day when the sky shifts again, when the monsoon returns, and when the ghost waters will once more find their way to the sea. Waters. Lake Megachad once covered an area larger than Germany. Then, almost as if a plug had been pulled, it drained. The land cracked, the animals left, and paradise began to die. If you had lived by its shores 10,000 years ago, you would have thought it endless. The horizon shimmered in blue. Waves rolled across miles of open water. The air smelled of algae and rain. Crocodiles lurked in the shallows, hippos wallowed near the reeds, and flamingos wheeled through the sky in pink clouds. It wasn't just a lake. It was a small inland ocean, a mirror to the heavens. People settled around it in clusters of huts, fishing with nets woven from reeds. They carved boats from hollowed logs and set off across the surface, their silhouettes dark against the setting sun. You can almost picture them, singing to keep time with the paddles, their laughter echoing over the water. For generations, this lake sustained everything: food, trade, culture, life itself. But nothing on Earth lasts forever, especially when the planet starts adjusting its thermostat. Around 5,000 BCE, the monsoon that had fed this great lake began to falter. The rains came later each year, stayed shorter, and fell harder, the meteorological equivalent of ghosting. At first, no one noticed. A lower waterline here, a few dead fish there. But over centuries, the lake began to shrink, its once smooth shoreline wrinkled like old parchment. At its peak, Megachad was one of the largest freshwater lakes the planet has ever known, about 350,000 square kilometers. Today, what remains of it is Lake Chad, a puddle by comparison, roughly 1/20th of its former glory. Standing on its edge now, you'd never guess it once drowned half a continent. It's like looking at a single teardrop from a god who once wept oceans. Scientists think that a combination of shifting rainfall patterns and geological changes drained the basin. Some of the water seeped underground into aquifers, some simply evaporated beneath the expanding sun. The climate grew unpredictable, the vegetation withdrew, and the animals followed. The hippos trudged south, the fish suffocated in shallow pools, and the humans, they packed up their villages and followed the vanishing rivers east, toward the Nile. The refugees of Eden, walking through mud that would soon harden into desert. Imagine being one of them. You've grown up on the shore of an ocean that seems eternal. You've built your house beside the water, watched your children play in it. Then, one morning, the horizon looks different. The glint of blue is gone. Days pass, and the air begins to sting. The ground cracks. The fish are gone. The birds stop coming. You don't even realize it at first, but you're watching your entire world die in slow motion. Archaeologists have found evidence of this heartbreak written into the landscape. Ancient shorelines, ghostly ridges that still mark where the water once touched, layers of fish bones far from any living water, abandoned hearths filled with cracked pottery and ash. The Sahara is littered with these silent goodbyes, left by people who couldn't bear to stay. It's strange to think that such an enormous transformation could happen so quietly. There were no eruptions, no earthquakes, no dramatic cataclysm, just the slow betrayal of the sky. The rain stopped keeping its promises, and the world below paid the price. Today, Lake Chad continues to shrink, a modern echo of that ancient disaster. Millions still depend on it, unaware that they're living on the last breath of a once immortal lake. The satellites show the same heartbreaking pattern, the water pulling back like a tide that will never return. If you stand there now, where the great lake once shimmered, the wind still carries a faint salt tang. You can almost hear the ghosts of waves. The sand crunches under your feet like old bones. Somewhere beneath you lies the memory of an inland sea, waiting for rain that no longer comes. Because that's the cruel beauty of the Sahara. It never truly forgets what it used to be. Every dune, every dry basin, every cracked shell in the sand is a monument to what water can create and what its absence can destroy. The lakes are gone, yes, but their stories, carved into the bones of the desert, still ripple through time, like waves that refuse to die. The rains ended because the Earth itself tilted. A small wobble in our planet's orbit shifted the monsoon, a subtle nudge that turned green fields into death zones. Climate, like fate, is a quiet assassin. It didn't happen in a single day. There was no thunderclap, no sign in the heavens saying good luck, you're about to live through the world's longest drought. It began slowly, so slowly that no one would have noticed. The first sign was the sky. Clouds that once gathered thick and heavy over the Sahara began to drift south. Seasons stretched thinner. Rains arrived later, and when they did, they came in brief, frantic bursts instead of the long, soaking symphonies the land had known for millennia. At first, life adapted. The people dug deeper wells. The animals followed shrinking rivers. The grass held on, stubbornly green around the last lakes. But the Earth was already making other plans. Every 20,000 years or so, our planet wobbles slightly on its axis, a gentle tilt called precession. That tiny cosmic movement can rearrange the weather of entire continents. It changes where sunlight falls most intensely, and with it, the great conveyor belt of the monsoon. When that balance shifted around 6,000 years ago, the Sahara was the unlucky recipient. The monsoon, once pulled north by the tilt, now slipped back south toward the equator. It was as if the sky itself packed its bags and left. Without its summer rains, the paradise of the green Sahara began to starve. You can imagine the first dry years, a few less storms, the grass taking longer to return after winter. Then a whole season with nothing but wind. For generations, the people might have told themselves it was temporary. A punishment, a test, the gods in a bad mood. But by the time their grandchildren were old, the lakes had begun to vanish, and the dust storms arrived like messengers of doom. The animals noticed first. Herds of antelope wandered farther between watering holes. The hippos, once thick as tourists on a beach, abandoned the lakes that had sustained them. Birds that once filled the air in pink and white flocks changed their flight paths. When the food chains began to crumble, the people followed. Imagine standing on a ridge, watching the horizon blur with heat, and realizing the rain wasn't coming back. Your ancestors had always told stories of the sky, of spirits that lived in the clouds, of water that was a gift, not a guarantee. But now the clouds are gone, the rivers are ghosts, and you can't remember the last time the thunder rolled. The transformation was geological, but to those who lived through it, it must have felt personal, like the earth itself had turned its back, and in a way it had. Without rain, the land baked. Without roots to hold it down, the soil turned to dust. Winds began to sweep across the plains, lifting entire fields into the air. The green world became beige, then gold, then dead. It's easy, sitting in the comfort of modern life, to underestimate how fragile paradise really is. All it takes is a fraction of a degree, the earth leaning a little differently, the sky deciding to take its rain elsewhere, and everything changes. The people of the green Sahara learned that lesson the hard way. They didn't just lose their water, they lost their memory of abundance. The irony is that this cosmic wobble, this planetary shrug, also created something new. The drying Sahara forced its refugees eastward, toward the Nile, toward the lands that would become Egypt. Out of the death of one paradise came the birth of another civilization. The gods didn't disappear, they migrated. But before that rebirth came centuries of silence. The grass turned to dust, the rivers disappeared beneath dunes. The monsoon's song grew faint and then stopped altogether. And somewhere, standing under a sun that had grown too hot, someone must have looked up and thought, the sky is moving away from us. They were right. The day the sky moved south was the day paradise began to die, not with thunder, but with stillness. And in that silence, the Sahara began to become what it is today, the world's greatest monument to how fragile life really is when the heavens stop listening. It didn't happen all at once. The sands crept in like an unwanted roommate. Grain by grain, year by year, each century a little drier, each generation a little hungrier, until the land simply gave up. The people who lived there probably didn't even notice at first. Change never announces itself with a fanfare. It whispers, a few more cracks in the soil, the grass not growing back as fast, the rivers pulling away from the villages like old friends who've stopped returning calls. You wake up one morning and realize the lake you fished in as a child has turned into a salt flat. Then the wind comes, gentle at first, brushing dust across your doorstep, and then stronger, carrying entire dunes on its back. The Sahara didn't fall in a day. It wasn't a disaster. It was a siege, a slow-motion conquest where the enemy was patient and invisible. The wind began to rule. It carried sand in waves, building dunes higher than houses. Villages were swallowed whole, and people kept moving, carrying what they could, abandoning what they couldn't. It must have been like living under a curse that arrived one handful of dust at a time. You can almost imagine the conversations. The rains are late again, the well's running dry. We'll move east next season. But next season never helped. The dry years became normal and then permanent. The children who were born into this new, harsher world didn't even know what they were missing. To them, the sand was simply home. Archaeologists find traces of this slow exodus scattered across the desert. Pots, tools, burial sites half buried in dunes. Some still stand eerily upright, like they're waiting for someone to return. The wind exposes them, buries them again, and repeats. It's as if the Sahara itself is editing history, deciding what we're allowed to remember. And it's not just the people who suffered. The animals vanished in waves too. The herds that once moved through the grasslands, gazelles, cattle, elephants, retreated south with the shrinking vegetation. The desert didn't kill them overnight. It just erased their food, their water, their hope. Even the mighty rivers surrendered, drying into invisible scars beneath the surface. The world was still beautiful, but it was a new kind of beauty, quiet, cruel, and empty. To live in that time must have been like watching the earth go to sleep. The color drained away first, greens turning brown, browns turning grey. Then came the sound. No more birds at dawn, no frogs after rain, just the endless whisper of the wind, shaping dunes into mountains. The silence must have been unbearable, and yet life resisted. Humans always do. They built walls of stone to block the wind, dug deeper for water, moved with the seasons like ghosts refusing to vanish. They painted even as the world dried around them, images of cattle and rain, a love letter to a life they could feel slipping away. Maybe painting was their way of refusing to admit defeat, to say, this happened. We were here. It was beautiful once. Every great civilization, it seems, ends not in fire but in sand. Babylon, Petra, Carthage, all reclaimed by the patient hand of dust. The Sahara is just the biggest example of that truth, a lesson written across 6 million square miles. The earth doesn't destroy, it reclaims. If you stand there today, in the heart of the desert, and let the wind pass over you, it feels alive. The dunes shift and breathe. You can almost see them moving, like waves in slow motion. Every gust carries the ghosts of what came before. Pollen from long dead trees, grains of clay from the bottom of vanished lakes, whispers of words spoken by people who no longer exist. And that's the eerie beauty of it all. The desert isn't empty. It's full of time, memory, and the endless cycle of creation and erasure. The sand isn't just the enemy of life, it's the record of it. Every grain is a fossilized moment, a fragment of the green Sahara's final days. So yes, the sand came slowly, politely even, one breeze at a time. But by the time anyone realized what was happening, it had already moved in permanently, not as a guest, but as the new landlord of the world's forgotten paradise. As the desert spread, the people fled. Some moved south into the jungles, others east toward the Nile. The refugees of the Sahara may have become the first Egyptians, carrying their memory of paradise into myth. You can almost picture it, long lines of families trudging across the cracked earth, shadows stretching behind them in the setting sun. The lakes that once glimmered like mirrors are gone, replaced by salt flats that shine like ghosts of water. The air hums with heat. Every breath tastes like dust. Somewhere behind them, the wind moves through the dunes like a sigh, covering the last traces of the world they're leaving behind. It wasn't a single migration. It was millions of quiet goodbyes stretched across centuries. As the green Sahara died, its people scattered in every direction, some following the shrinking rivers south, others chasing the monsoon east toward a ribbon of water that would one day be called the Nile. Each tribe thought they were simply surviving. In reality, they were reshaping the map of human civilization. The journey was brutal. Food grew scarce, water scarcer. Every oasis became a battle, not of armies, but of endurance. They followed herds when they could, and when the herds vanished, they followed hope. Nights were long and cold, the stars sharp enough to cut. You can almost hear the sound of tired feet crunching over ancient gravel, the murmured prayers to gods who no longer answered. But even in flight, they carried their world with them. The stories, the songs, the gods of rain and cattle. The memory of abundance became their religion. When they finally reached the Nile Valley, they must have looked at its flooded plains and wept. Here was life again, water flowing endlessly, soil dark and rich, birds screaming with joy. To people who had seen the Sahara die, the Nile must have looked like a miracle. And so they stayed. They built homes of mud and reed, planted crops beside the water, and began to rebuild what the sand had stolen. Their knowledge of stars, of herding, of the rhythm of the rains, became the foundation of Egypt's first settlements. The farmers of the Nile were not born in the valley. They were exiles from the west, refugees of a lost paradise. The Sahara was their Eden, and the Nile became their salvation. Even the myths remember it. The ancient Egyptians spoke of Zep Tepi, the first time, a golden age when gods walked among men and the world was lush and green. It sounds like myth, but perhaps it was memory, a faded recollection of the green Sahara, passed down through generations until it hardened into legend. The gods of the Nile, many of them associated with water, cattle, and fertility, seem like distant echoes of Saharan spirits. The rain gods became river gods. The savanna became a floodplain. Paradise was reborn, just in a narrower strip of green. Not everyone found their way to Egypt. Some wandered south into the jungles and grasslands that still clung to life. Others moved west, their descendants eventually becoming the pastoral peoples of Central Africa. In this way, the Green Sahara didn't vanish. It spread. Its people became the roots of dozens of future cultures, each one carrying fragments of that lost Eden. But migration always leaves ghosts. The old homeland remained behind, slowly sinking under sand. The winds covered the paths they once walked, their hearths, their tools, their paintings, all buried, waiting for someone thousands of years later to stumble upon them and wonder. For those who left, the memory of rain never faded. You can feel it in the oldest Egyptian hymns, the reverence for water, the gratitude for life, the fear of drought. They didn't forget the desert. They built their civilization as a promise never to return to it. Every canal dug, every flood measured, every prayer to the Nile was a way of keeping the sand at bay. And maybe that's what humanity has always done. We move, we rebuild, and we mythologize what we lose. The Green Sahara became a story of gods and gardens, a half-remembered paradise we still chase in one form or another. Because deep down, we're all descendants of those refugees, the garden people, still searching for the place where water meets memory. And perhaps that's the greatest irony of all. Civilization didn't rise in spite of disaster. It rose because of it. The Sahara's death didn't end humanity's story. It began the next chapter. When you lose your home to the desert, you turn it into heaven. The stories of Eden, of a lost paradise, may be ancient memories of a world that was once real and then buried by sand. Every civilization, at some point, writes a story about the place where everything was perfect before it went wrong. The Greeks had Elysium, the Sumerians had Dilmun, the Hebrews called it Eden, the Hindus spoke of Satya Yuga, the age of truth, and perhaps long before ink ever met parchment, those myths were born here, in the memory of the Sahara's vanished lakes. Because when a paradise dies, people don't forget it. They turn it into scripture. Imagine the Green Sahara's last generations. They had seen the sky stop giving, the rivers stop flowing, the grass shrivel to dust. And when they left, when they crossed into new lands where the rain still fell, they must have told stories of where they'd come from, about the great lakes that stretched beyond the horizon, the trees that gave shade so deep you could sleep through the day, the rivers that sang. Over time, those memories changed shape. What was once geography became mythology. Paradise was no longer a place. It became the place before. Archaeologists find evidence of this shared memory scattered across continents. Flood myths, in particular, are everywhere, tales of worlds drowned, then reborn. But if the Sahara once flourished with vast lakes and rivers, and then lost them all, it's easy to see how those stories began. To the people watching the water retreat, the end of the world wouldn't have looked like fire or war. It would have looked like thirst. In their oral traditions, the ancestors of the Nile civilizations spoke of the land of plenty that existed before the desert. The ancient Egyptians called it Tanita, the divine land, where the gods themselves once lived. Some historians think this may be a poetic echo of the Green Sahara, preserved in the earliest Egyptian creation myths. The gods didn't descend from heaven. They migrated from the west, just like the people who worshipped them. And it's not just Egypt. Across North Africa and the Middle East, there are whispers of a fertile land swallowed by time. In Berber tradition, there's a legend of Tazult, a golden land taken by the sands. The Tuareg tells stories of a sea of grass that once stretched where the dunes now stand, a place where cattle walked freely and the sky rained every day. The parallels are too strong to ignore. These are not fairy tales. They're fossils of memory. Even the biblical story of Eden fits the pattern. A garden between four rivers, a paradise lost because of human failing. It sounds like theology, but it might be geography. Scholars have long argued about where Eden could have been. Mesopotamia, Armenia, somewhere mythical. But maybe the real answer lies beneath the Sahara. Four rivers once did crisscross this land, and when they vanished, so did the much world they sustained. There's a strange poetry in that. The idea that the first humans to imagine heaven might have been remembering home, that the myth of a fall wasn't about sin, but about climate, that we didn't eat the wrong fruit, we just ran out of rain. As the Sahara dried, the people who left it carried not only their tools and livestock, but their grief, and grief over time becomes myth. It's how humans endure the unbearable, by turning loss into meaning. The lakes they once fished in became the rivers of heaven. The storms that used to drench the plains became the voice of angry gods. The desert that took everything became a warning. Paradise is fragile, and heaven can disappear without a sound. If you walk through the Sahara today, it's hard to believe this emptiness once inspired creation myths. But look closer at the fossils of fish beneath the dunes, the faint outlines of old shorelines, the rock art showing rain and joy. These are the verses of the oldest story ever told. We were happy once, and then the sky changed. And maybe that's why every civilization since has dreamed of paradise. Because somewhere deep in our collective memory, we've already lived there. We remember the lakes, we remember the green, and when we tell stories of heaven, we're not imagining the future, we're mourning the past. The Garden of Eden, it seems, was never lost. It just turned to sand. Cave paintings show people herding cattle under rainbows. Some myths say these animals were gifts from the gods, or perhaps just the world's first farmers trying to stay optimistic during a drought. If you had wandered through the green Sahara 6,000 or 7,000 years ago, you would have heard it before you saw it. The sound of bells, low, hollow, rhythmic, the clatter of horns brushing against one another, voices shouting across the plains. It was the heartbeat of a new kind of life, the herders and their sacred cattle. These weren't just animals, they were survival made flesh. As the climate began to shift and the Great Lakes retreated, people turned to cattle as walking reservoirs, mobile food, warmth and wealth, all in one snorting, unpredictable package. The herders followed the last green valleys, driving their cows across endless grasslands, beneath a sky that still remembered how to rain. In the rock art left behind, thousands of engravings spread across the desert. Cattle are everywhere, not just drawn, but worshipped. Some paintings show them painted in red and white, adorned with necklaces, horns curved like crescents. Others show people dancing around them, arms raised to the sky, rainbows arcing overhead. It's as if the people believed that as long as the cattle thrived, the heavens would too. And perhaps they weren't wrong. These early herders were among the first to master domestication, not just of animals, but of nature itself. The relationship was intimate, even spiritual. A good herd meant survival. A dying one meant doom. To feed and protect them was to keep the world turning. And so cattle became more than livestock. They became symbols of fertility, strength, and divine favor. Some myths say that the gods themselves descended to gift the first cattle to humanity. In parts of Africa, that story still lingers. The sky god sent cows down a rope from heaven, but humans, ungrateful as always, cut the rope, and that's why we no longer live close to the gods. The tale feels ancient because it is ancient, an echo from the green Sahara, where the connection between sky, rain, and cattle was sacred. Even the early Egyptians inherited this devotion. Long before the pharaohs, before the pyramids, the people of the Nile revered the cow as divine. Hathor, goddess of love and motherhood, was depicted as a cow, or as a woman crowned with horns and the solar disk. She wasn't a new invention, she was a memory, the echo of Saharan herders who once prayed to the sky for rain and thanked their cattle for surviving it. If you think about it, cattle were humanity's first insurance policy. They could walk when rivers dried up, graze when crops failed, and still give milk when hope ran low. The Green Sahara herders might have been the first people to realize that survival wasn't just about living off the land, it was about learning to move with it. They didn't build temples of stone, they built faith on four legs. The rock art tells us this in color and motion. In Tassili Naja, there's a panel showing dozens of cattle marching beneath swirling patterns that look like storm clouds. In another, a woman stands beside a cow as rain falls, her hands raised in what looks like gratitude. Whether those lines represent prayer, magic, or memory, one thing is clear. These people believed their lives were bound to the rhythm of the sky. And when the rains began to fail for good, when the grass browned and the herds grew thin, that belief only deepened. To lose the rain was to lose the gods, to lose their favor. So they carried their herds eastward, following the ghost of the monsoon, each hoofstep tracing a line of migration that would later become the lifeline of Egypt. Even after they left the Sahara, the memory of those cattle followed them. In every culture descended from those refugees, from the Fulani herders of West Africa to the ancient Egyptians, the cow remained sacred, not because of superstition, but because it fed and saved their ancestors when the earth itself turned hostile. The cattle of the sky gods weren't mythical creatures. They were the last gift of a dying paradise, the link between heaven and earth, between rain and survival. And in their bells and lowing voices, the people heard a promise that life could still move forward even as the world around them turned to dust. So the next time you hear the low murmur of cattle, or see their painted forms on a cave wall, remember, you're hearing an ancient prayer, not for wealth or power, but for mercy, a plea whispered into the wind by the people who watched the sky fade and learned to live beneath its silence. In the green Sahara, shamans painted stars and spirits onto rock. They mapped the skies long before telescopes. Perhaps they looked up at the Milky Way and saw a reflection of their dying rivers. Before cities, before temples, before anyone thought of writing things down, there were the hunters and the healers, the dreamers who lived halfway between the earth and the sky. They were the bridge between the living and the invisible, the interpreters of the wind, the rain, and the stars. When you lived in a world that could change overnight, when rain could mean life and silence could mean extinction, you needed someone to talk to the unseen, and that someone was the shaman. The green Sahara was their cathedral, wide, open, alive. Every horizon was an altar, every thunderstorm a sermon. The shamans didn't build monuments, they built meaning. They painted what they saw and what they felt on the faces of cliffs and inside dark caves where firelight flickered. The figures they drew weren't just animals or people. They were symbols, energy, transformation. To them, the world wasn't divided between the spiritual and the physical. It was all one vast, breathing thing. Many of their paintings survive. Some show hunters in trance-like poses, bows raised toward glowing orbs that might be stars or spirits. Others depict half-human figures, bodies painted with dots and lines, eyes wide and otherworldly. These were not just portraits. They were cosmic diagrams, stories about balance and connection, rituals frozen in pigment. Scientists call this astral mapping. Long before anyone used compasses or telescopes, these ancient skywatchers tracked the heavens with astonishing precision. Some of their carvings align with constellations we still know today: Orion, Sirius, the Milky Way. Imagine them lying under the stars, tracing those patterns across the sky, realizing the same truth astronomers still whisper today. Everything moves in cycles. Even the heavens breathe. Maybe that's why they painted the stars as rivers, twisting across the sky, a reflection of the lakes and waterways below. When the land began to dry, they must have noticed how the river in the heavens remained while the ones on earth disappeared. Perhaps they looked up and thought, our rivers have gone home to the sky. It's a poetic thought, and a painfully human one. Their understanding of the natural world was both scientific and sacred. They knew which herbs soothed fevers, which roots cured bites, which rituals calmed the mind. To them, healing wasn't about fighting nature. It was about listening to it. The hunters and healers worked side by side, one feeding the body, the other feeding the spirit. Together they kept their people alive through every drought, every migration, every quiet apocalypse. When the drought worsened and the rains began their long retreat south, the shamans became even more important. People turned to them for answers, for hope, for meaning. What did it mean when the rain didn't come, when the cattle died, when the sand began to swallow the land? The shamans read the wind, watched the stars, and whispered that everything was part of the cycle, that paradise was not lost, only transformed. Their role wasn't just to heal the body, but to keep the story alive. You can still see their fingerprints on the rock, preserved in mineral pigment and time. Some are small, delicate spirals, dots, handprints pressed against stone like signatures. Others are enormous, murals that span entire cliffs, showing scenes of ritual, rain, and rebirth. To the untrained eye, they're just art. But to those who listen, they're music, the rhythm of a civilization still trying to sing even as it faded into sand. There's something deeply comforting about that. Even as the world around them fell apart, the people of the green Sahara didn't stop looking upward. They didn't stop painting, healing, or hoping. They kept their connection to the stars, to the unseen, to the idea that everything lost eventually returns in another form. So when you stand beneath the night sky today, when you look up at the Milky Way stretching across the darkness like a celestial river, you're seeing what they saw, the same stars, the same endless path of light. And maybe, just maybe, you're also seeing what they believed, that somewhere beyond the reach of sand and time, the rivers still flow, the rain still falls, and the hunters and healers of the green Sahara are still watching, still whispering, remember us. Beneath dunes in Niger and Libya, archaeologists find skeletons buried with care, women wearing jewelry, children wrapped in leather, men with tools. They were not savages, they were storytellers with calloused hands. It's hard to imagine now that somewhere beneath those endless dunes, beneath the weight of 10,000 summers, there are people still sleeping. Not kings in golden coffins, but farmers, mothers, and hunters who once watched the rain fall on grass that's now dust. Their bones rest in sand that used to be soil, and their jewelry, beads, shells, polished stones, still glimmers faintly when the sun hits it just right. The Sahara guards its dead like secrets. Every so often, a storm or an excavation reveals them. Skeletons perfectly preserved, curled in fetal positions, adorned with ornaments that tell stories of love, loss, and memory. At a site called Gobero in Niger, sometimes called the Green Graveyard of the Sahara, archaeologists found a community frozen in time. Dozens of burials spanning thousands of years, from the height of the Green Sahara to its slow death. One grave, in particular, silenced everyone who saw it. A mother and her two children, buried hand in hand. Their bones are dust white against the brown earth, and pollen still clings to the soil, proof that flowers were laid over them before the sand came. Whoever buried them didn't just cover a body, they made an offering. Even in a world collapsing into drought, they took the time to make it beautiful. These were not the mindless primitives we sometimes imagine when we think of prehistory. Their graves tell us they understood love, mourning, and continuity, the deep, aching human need to be remembered. They carved beads from shells carried hundreds of miles, shaped necklaces from bones and ivory, and placed tools beside the dead, as if to say, you might still need these wherever you're going. And they didn't bury their dead in random places. Many were laid to rest beside lakes that are now gone, under trees that have long since turned to dust. Their tombs were landmarks in a landscape that was alive, places of pilgrimage, of memory. When the rain stopped and the lakes retreated, the living followed the water, but they left their ancestors behind to guard the past. Archaeologists can read their lives through these burials like pages in a forgotten book. In early graves, the bones are tall, strong, the teeth worn but healthy, signs of a rich diet from lakes full of fish. In later burials, the bodies grow smaller, more fragile, signs of hunger and stress. Jewelry becomes rarer, weapons simpler. The climate story is written in their bones, but even as the world grew harsher, their rituals didn't vanish. If anything, they became more careful, more tender. Some graves show evidence of multiple burials, added over generations, as if families returned to honor those who came before. One tomb in Libya contains a man buried, with a flint blade and a necklace of tiny shells that once shimmered with color. He was someone's father, someone's hunter, someone's story. When you stand in these places today, the dunes silent, the air still, it's impossible not to feel their presence. The sand presses against your boots, the wind hums softly, and somewhere below, people who once laughed, danced, and built fires still lie where they fell asleep thousands of years ago. The Sahara has no pyramids, no marble statues, no monumental inscriptions, but it doesn't need them. Its tombs are carved into the earth itself, quiet, humble, and heartbreakingly human. Each one whispers the same message. We were here, we loved, we endured. In a way, these people achieved what all of us hope for, not immortality, but remembrance. Every time a storm shifts a dune and reveals a fragment of bone or a bead, they speak again. They remind us that history isn't just written in cities or carved in stone. It's also buried quietly beneath the sand, in the lives of people who never imagined they'd be forgotten. So, the next time you see an image of the Sahara, endless, empty, golden, remember, it isn't empty at all. It's a vast, silent cemetery of souls who once stood where the rivers ran, who watched the sky change, and who laid each other to rest with the same tenderness we still show today. The sands may have taken their homes, their herds, their gods, but they couldn't take their humanity. That somehow still breathes beneath the dunes. Every culture remembers the flood. Maybe that's because they all came from here, from the lakes and storms of the Sahara's green age. When the rains stopped, the memory of water became holy. Water is the oldest god humanity ever worshipped. Before temples and priests, before kings and calendars, there was the sound of rain on soil, that soft percussion of life itself. In the Green Sahara, the people didn't just live with water, they lived because of it. It was their mirror, their medicine, their mythology. When it left, they didn't forget it. They turned it into legend. For thousands of years, water defined their world. It shaped their migrations, their diets, their art, their sense of time. It was the first clock, the rhythm by which life pulsed. The coming of the rains meant rebirth. Their absence meant despair. The lakes were both home and horizon, calm one day, furious the next. You can almost imagine a family huddled under a shelter of reeds as thunder rolled overhead, watching the storm light up the sky and whispering, "The gods are speaking again." But then, as the centuries passed and the heavens grew stingy, those whispers turned into prayers. The rains became stories, and the stories became scripture. The people who fled the dying Sahara carried those stories with them, east toward the Nile, south toward the Sahel, north toward the coasts, retelling them around fires until they solidified into myth. And the pattern is everywhere, from Mesopotamia's Epic of Gilgamesh to the Hebrew Genesis, from the Greek tale of Deucalion's flood to African oral traditions about the time when the sea walked inland. The same story repeats. The world once drowned and was reborn. The details change, but the feeling doesn't. The water is always divine, both destroyer and savior. What if those myths aren't just coincidences? What if they're memories, distorted over millennia, of the green Sahara's final act, the time when the rains went mad, when the lakes rose and then vanished, when the people of Eden packed up their gods and followed the shrinking rivers into exile? It's a chilling thought that every flood we remember might be an echo of a flood that ended not a city, but an entire climate. Archaeologists have found evidence that the Sahara's transition wasn't steady. It swung violently, wet centuries followed by brutal droughts, then back again. To the people living there, it must have felt like the sky itself couldn't make up its mind. One year the rivers would overflow, drowning fields and villages. The next, they'd dry into cracked scars. How could you not think that the heavens were angry? That volatility left its mark. In the myths of early African and Mediterranean cultures, water isn't just sustenance, it's personality. It rewards and punishes. It can give you life, but it can also take it. The Nile's floods became sacred cycles, the Tigris and Euphrates divine, instruments of order and chaos. It's as though humanity, having lost control of the rain, never quite got over it. The people who came out of the Sahara were the children of water. They knew its moods better than anyone. Their rituals revolved around it. Songs for rain, offerings for rivers, ceremonies to bless boats and wells. Even when they settled in lands that never saw storms, they still told stories about them. They carried the memory of thunder in their bones. You can see it in their art. Rock carvings of fish hundreds of miles from the sea, shells buried with the dead, swirling wave patterns etched into stone tools. Even when the lakes were long gone, they kept drawing water, as if by remembering it, they could summon it back. And maybe that's the most human thing of all. When the rain stopped, we didn't stop dreaming of them. When the rivers vanished, we invented gods to explain why. When paradise drowned or dried or disappeared, we wrote poems to keep it alive. The green Sahara is gone, but its mythology still flows through us, a quiet current running beneath our oldest stories. When we speak of floods, when we pray for rain, when we stand by the sea and feel both fear and awe, we're remembering what our ancestors saw, a world that once breathed water and then forgot how. We are still the children of water. Every drop we drink, every storm we watch, every tear we shed, it's all part of that inheritance. Because somewhere deep in our collective memory, beneath layers of sand and time, the green Sahara is still reigning. Some settlements didn't flee, they were simply erased. The wind covered them, layer after layer, until only the stars knew where they once stood. The Sahara became history's most efficient janitor. There's something eerie about the desert's perfection. From far above, the dunes look smooth, infinite, flawless, like nothing ever happened there. But that's the lie of the Sahara. Beneath those rolling golden waves lies a graveyard of worlds, whole communities, homes, hearths, temples and dreams, buried under thousands of years of sand, erased so completely that even memory gave up. We tend to think of deserts as empty, but the Sahara is the opposite. It's overcrowded, just vertically. Beneath your feet, there are cities. Beneath those cities, older ones. Beneath those, bones and tools and broken pots that once belonged to people who thought their world would last forever. The desert is not empty. It's layered with ghosts. Archaeologists know this better than anyone. Every discovery begins with the same story. A storm passes, a dune shifts, and something appears. A wall, a pot, a skeleton, a shard of painted clay. Then the wind returns and covers it again, as if to say, you weren't supposed to see that. It's almost as though the Sahara is shy, reluctant to show the world its secrets. In the dunes of Niger, Chad, and Libya, scientists have found evidence of settlements, not tiny villages, but organized communities with streets, wells, and storage pits. Some show traces of agriculture, irrigation ditches, grinding stones, and granaries. People didn't just live here, they thrived. But when the monsoon withdrew and the rivers died, the sand came for them, slowly, patiently, relentlessly. There's a cruel intimacy to how the desert erases things. It doesn't smash or burn, it preserves. The dry air mummifies, the sand cushions, and time folds over itself. What was once a courtyard becomes a fossil. A cooking pot turns into archaeology. You can almost hear the echo of laughter from families who never imagined their homes would one day be dust. One of the most haunting discoveries lies in the Fezzan region of Libya, where remnants of ancient walls and hearths peek out between dunes. Some belong to the Garamantes, a civilization that rose and fell on the edge of the Sahara. Thousands of years after the Green Age ended, they built irrigation systems so advanced that Roman engineers later studied them, and yet even their canals couldn't fight the sky. When the water vanished, the sand moved in. The Garamantes vanished not with war, but with thirst. The pattern repeats across the desert. Settlements that once stood on lake shores now lie buried under dunes taller than cathedrals. Oases that once bustled with life turned into mirages. And sometimes, when rare storms tear across the Sahara, the past resurfaces, walls shimmering through the sand like ghosts taking a breath before disappearing again. If you stand in one of these places, where nothing moves except the wind, it's hard not to feel small. The silence feels heavier than sound. The ground shifts underfoot, whispering like parchment. And somewhere beneath you, just meters away, are the remains of lives that once looked up at these same stars. Maybe they prayed for rain, maybe they didn't, but their footprints are gone all the same. The desert doesn't rage, it forgets. It doesn't judge or punish, it simply reclaims. You can build your walls high, and your wells deep, but the sand always wins in the end. It's not malicious, just patient. The Sahara doesn't destroy history, it files it away. And yet for all its silence, the desert has a strange mercy. Because it preserves what it buries, the Sahara is also a time capsule. The bones of its people are still there, their tools intact, their art untouched. When the wind finally uncovers them, it's as if they've been waiting to speak again. And in a way they do. Every potsherd, every painted stone, every human tooth is a word in a language that hasn't been spoken in 10,000 years. So yes, the sand swallowed their cities, but it didn't erase them completely. It just tucked them in, preserved them beneath a blanket of gold, waiting for curious hands to find them again. The Sahara is a paradox, the destroyer that remembers, the cleaner that keeps everything. Every dune is both a tomb and an archive, every gust a page turning, and beneath it all, the buried cities of the green Sahara still dream, silent, patient, and eternal, waiting for the wind to whisper their names once more. Modern radar scans reveal strange geometric shapes beneath the sands, patterns that shouldn't exist naturally. Are they riverbeds, cities, or the fingerprints of a civilization forgotten even by myth? From space, the Sahara looks eternal, an ocean of gold frozen in time. But when scientists began to look closer, the illusion cracked. Using ground-penetrating radar and satellite imaging, they saw what the naked eye never could: outlines, angles, and symmetry. Lines too straight to be rivers, circles too perfect to be random. Beneath those endless dunes lies something organized, something deliberate. At first, they thought they were looking at ancient drainage systems, the ghosts of rivers that once fed the green Sahara. But the more they scanned, the stranger it became. The radar images showed grid-like formations buried hundreds of meters deep, patterns that mirrored the structure of early cities, not scattered settlements, but planned geometry, rectangles, clusters, corridors. Nature doesn't build in right angles, humans do. The Sahara began to whisper again, and this time, what it whispered was unnerving. Could it be that we haven't just lost a few scattered tribes and lakes, but an entire civilization, one erased so cleanly by time and sand that even history forgot it existed? The evidence isn't conclusive. It never is. Some scientists argue that these are merely geological quirks, the result of shifting dunes, hardened sediments, and the remnants of old river systems. But others aren't so sure, because among the geometric shapes, researchers have also found anomalies, magnetic signatures consistent with metal deposits, buried too deeply to be natural, tools perhaps, or ruins. One of the most compelling discoveries came from the central Sahara, where radar picked up what appeared to be a vast circular formation nearly a kilometer across, surrounded by smaller concentric rings. To some, it looked like a natural crater. To others, it looked suspiciously like a city plan, a prehistoric Atlantis of the desert. And that idea, wild as it sounds, isn't new. For centuries, travelers crossing the Sahara have spoken of strange mounds, ancient walls, and cities of the jinn swallowed by the dunes. Tuareg oral traditions mention ruins older than memory, built by beings before the time of men. Early explorers in the 19th century reported stumbling across stone blocks half buried in sand, too weathered and too remote to explain. Then the wind covered them again. We may never know exactly what lies beneath. Excavating the Sahara is nearly impossible. The dunes shift, the heat destroys equipment, and the sheer scale is overwhelming. But every few years, new data hints at something deeper. Beneath the dunes lie sediment layers that tell of long habitation, pottery fragments, hearth remains, and carved stones buried miles from any modern settlement. These aren't the traces of nomads passing through. They're the remnants of people who built. It's almost poetic, in a tragic way. The desert that looks so simple from above, blank, eternal, featureless, may actually be the planet's most crowded graveyard of forgotten stories. Every grain of sand could be a collapsed roof tile, a fallen wall, or a tool smoothed by 10,000 years of wind. And maybe that's why the myths persist. Tales of lost kingdoms under the dunes appear everywhere, from the Berber legends of Zazura, the white city buried by God, to Arabic stories of Iram, the city of pillars, destroyed for its pride and swallowed by the sand. Could these legends be memories, distorted but true, of real places erased by climate and time? The thought lingers. Perhaps the Sahara wasn't just a home, it was a cradle. Maybe this was where humanity learned to build before we learned to remember. Maybe the first stones we stacked, the first walls we raised, are still there, quietly waiting under the dunes. Scientists continue to scan, to listen, to map the whispers of the ground. The data comes back like a faint heartbeat. Lines, circles, shadows. Something down there wants to be seen again. And one day, perhaps when the wind shifts or technology sharpens, we'll see it clearly. The echoes of a civilization that vanished so completely it turned into landscape. Until then, the Sahara keeps its secrets, silent and smug, knowing that no matter how deep we dig, it's always one step ahead, hiding history in plain sight beneath the sand. As the desert dried, those who escaped to the Nile brought farming, astronomy, and memory. Egypt may not have begun beside the river. It may have moved there when the Sahara died. It's strange to think that the world's most famous river, the cradle of pharaohs, pyramids, and papyrus, might owe its greatness to the death of a desert. But that's exactly what the evidence suggests. The Nile didn't give birth to civilization, the Sahara did. The river was simply where its refugees finally stopped running. When the green Sahara began to fade, its people scattered like seeds in the wind. Some moved south, some west, but many followed the last lifelines of water eastward. There they found something remarkable. A narrow valley carved by a steady river, fed by faraway rains. It wasn't as lush as their lost homeland, but it was stable, a promise of permanence after centuries of change, and so they stayed. The first settlers along the Nile weren't Egyptians, at least not yet. They were Saharans, carrying with them the tools, ideas, and traditions of a world that had vanished under sand. They knew how to read the skies, how to predict the rains, how to herd cattle, and how to make the land yield. They had already learned the rhythm of nature in a place where survival depended on listening to it. When they reached the Nile, they simply applied what they already knew. Only now, the river replaced the monsoon as their god. You can see their fingerprints everywhere in early Egyptian culture. The cattle cults, for instance, the reverence for bulls and cows that would later appear in the worship of Hathor and Apis, didn't begin in the Nile Valley. It began in the Sahara. The rock art of Tassili and the engravings of Nabta Playa, near the border of modern Egypt and Sudan, show herders performing rituals around cattle thousands of years before the first pyramid was built. The cattle of the sky gods had already walked east long before the pharaohs. And then there's astronomy, the oldest science and perhaps the most poetic. In the middle of the Sahara, long before Stonehenge or the Great Pyramids, the people of Nabta Playa built a stone circle aligned with the rising of the sun at the summer solstice. It's one of the earliest known observatories on Earth, roughly 7,000 years old. These people weren't just watching the heavens for curiosity's sake. They were tracking the seasons, predicting floods, and timing their migrations. When they reached the Nile, they brought that same celestial wisdom with them. The temples of later Egypt, those perfect alignments with the solstice sun, the obsession with stars like Sirius, were echoes of Saharan sky watchers who refused to forget the language of the heavens. Even Egypt's myth of rebirth, Osiris, the god of life and death who was buried and resurrected by the flooding Nile, mirrors the Saharan experience. In the desert, water was death, and rebirth incarnate. The rains came, life bloomed, the rains left, and death returned. Year after year, the same story played out. When those people reached the Nile, they found the same pattern: flood, fertility, decay, renewal. The old gods of rain simply put on new names. Archaeologists can trace this migration in the layers of soil itself. Pottery found in early Nile settlements matches the styles of Saharan sites hundreds of miles away. Tools, burial practices, even genetic markers tell the same story. The Nile was a melting pot of desert survivors, weaving their knowledge into something entirely new. And from that fusion of loss, adaptation, and memory came Egypt. The first dynasty didn't appear out of nowhere. It rose from a lineage that had already learned to build, to organize, to endure. When the pharaohs finally began to rule, they were standing on the shoulders of people who had spent centuries mastering the art of survival in a dying world. It's a poetic irony. The desert that killed their homeland created the conditions for their greatness. Without the Sahara's collapse, there might never have been pyramids or temples or hieroglyphs, just scattered tribes still chasing the rain. In its death, the Sahara passed the torch of civilization to the Nile. So when we picture ancient Egypt, the shimmering river, the towering monuments, the eternal sun, we should remember the forgotten people who brought their world there in memory. The Nile's first farmers, priests, and kings were children of the desert, carrying the wisdom of a greener world buried beneath the sand. Egypt was not born from nothing. It was born from remembrance, the last dream of the Sahara, made eternal in stone. In some African myths, the gods abandoned humanity when the land grew dry. Maybe that was just another way of saying the climate changed, and no one could stop it. It's one of those stories that repeats itself all over the world, not just in Africa, but everywhere people once watched the sky and begged it to stay kind. In one version, the gods walk away in anger. In another, they drift upward into the heavens, too sad to watch what's happening below. And in some, they simply fall silent, not gone, just tired. The message is always the same. The world changed, and the ones who once protected it couldn't or wouldn't intervene. In the Green Sahara, this wasn't metaphor. It was experience. For thousands of years, the people of that world had lived in rhythm with the rain. The thunder was their drumbeat. The monsoon was their miracle. They believed deeply that the gods lived in the clouds, generous, moody, and loud. And then, one generation, the rains came a little late. The next, a little weaker. Then one day they stopped altogether. The sky that had once spoken in storms now whispered nothing at all. To live through that must have felt like divine betrayal. Imagine watching your rivers vanish while your prayers turn to dust in your mouth. The crops shrivel, the cattle starve, the horizon shimmers with heat. You look up for help, but the sky looks back like an empty room. The myths tell it beautifully. In one West African story, the supreme god once lived close enough that people could speak directly to him, but they were noisy, ungrateful, and constantly begging. Tired of their complaints, he moved farther away, first to the mountaintops, then to the clouds, and finally beyond the stars. The people left behind learned to pray to smaller spirits, to ancestors, to rain itself. The god never returned. In another tradition from the Sahel, the rain spirits once danced freely across the earth, painting the world green wherever they stepped. But when humanity stopped honoring the balance, cutting too many trees, wasting too much water, the spirits lifted their feet and left, leaving behind the footprint of drought, the Sahara. It's mythic poetry, but beneath it is science. The earth wobbled on its axis, the monsoon drifted south, and paradise dried up. The gods didn't leave, the climate did. You can almost see the connection between faith and weather in real time. As the rains disappeared, the gods transformed. They became more distant, more mysterious, less about presence and more about memory. The lush, tactile gods of rivers and storms evolved into sun gods, sky gods, and creators who watched from afar. When the environment became harsher, so did heaven. Egypt inherited that shift. In the old Saharan world, people worshipped the rain. In the new Nile world, they worshipped the sun. Ra, the blazing god of the sky, ruled over everything. A god who didn't cry, didn't flood, didn't come down to dance among humans. He shone from a distance, unreachable and absolute. It's the same pattern. When the gods left, humanity built taller stories to reach them again. But the truth is, they probably never left at all. The people of the Green Sahara adapted as they always did. They carried their gods in their stories, reshaping them as their landscape changed. When the rain stopped, they turned to the river. When the river failed, they turned to the sun. When the sun burned too hot, they turned to the stars. Faith, like water, finds new channels. It's tempting to think of those old myths as superstition, but they were something far more profound, a way of processing grief on a planetary scale. When your entire world dries up, what else can you do but invent meaning for it? To say, the gods left is softer than saying we are alone. It's the human way of narrating loss. And in a sense, those stories still echo today. The climate changes again, the skies grow hotter, and we find new ways to describe our helplessness. Not in myths, but in science. We don't say, the gods are leaving anymore. We say, the atmosphere is changing, but the feeling is the same awe, the same fear, the same quiet resignation that the sky, once our friend, is doing something we can't control. So maybe the Green Sahara didn't just give birth to civilization. Maybe it gave birth to faith itself, to the idea that the forces of nature are conscious, that the sky can love and leave. Because when you've lived in a world that bloomed and died in front of you, you learn a humbling truth. Sometimes the gods don't abandon you out of anger. Sometimes they leave because the world itself is changing, and they were never gods to begin with, just the names we gave to rain and sun and time. For thousands of years, the Sahara slept, a sea of silence, its memories buried. Only wind and time wandered freely across its bones. If deserts dream, then the Sahara's dream is long and slow, a golden slumber stretching across millennia. The once green world of lakes, animals, and laughter gradually faded into a landscape so still it feels like it's holding its breath. No sound of rain, no croak of frogs, no footprints that last more than a day. Just dunes, endless, shifting, alive in their own quiet way. When the last of the rains withdrew, the Sahara closed its eyes. The people who had once called it home had already fled, leaving behind their fires, their art, their bones. What had been a paradise of thunder and rivers became an empire of silence. And yet in that silence, the desert found a kind of peace, a stillness so complete that even the sun seems to hang there a little longer, as if reluctant to move on. For the next 5,000 years, the Sahara slept under its own weight. The winds did their work slowly, carving dunes that migrated like living mountains, burying old riverbeds, smoothing away the scars of memory. It became the planet's great eraser, deleting civilizations, animals, and forests with patient precision. If you could watch it in time-lapse, you'd see it breathe, dunes rolling like waves, storms rising and fading, the land subtly exhaling every century. To the few who dared to cross it, the Sahara must have felt otherworldly, like walking across the surface of another planet. The air shimmers with heat, the horizon bends like glass, and sound travels strangely, as if it's afraid to disturb the quiet. The desert is not empty, but it's hollow, vast, echoing, waiting. Travelers would have seen bones of camels or men emerging briefly from the sand, then disappearing again by dusk. Even death doesn't stay long here. And yet, even in sleep, the Sahara was not entirely dead. Deep beneath the dunes, water still flows. Ancient aquifers, holding the last memory of the rains. Fossils of fish and crocodiles still rest in limestone beds, perfectly preserved. Seeds, locked in the soil, wait centuries for a drop of moisture to awaken them. The desert doesn't destroy, it preserves, it pauses, it waits. Occasionally the Sahara stirs, just enough to remind the world it's still breathing. A rare storm will sweep across its surface, and for a few days the dunes bloom. Tiny flowers burst from the sand, fragile and defiant. The air smells faintly of wet dust, like an old book cracking open for the first time in ages. Then the heat returns and the desert rolls back into its eternal nap. Nomads still wander across its surface. The Tuareg, the Berbers, the ones who learned to live where life forgot itself. To them, the desert isn't dead, it's sacred. They call it the empty quarter, but they don't mean it as an insult. They know the desert has moods, tempers, and memory. They know the dunes move, but the stories stay. Around their fires, they tell of buried cities, of rivers that once sang beneath the stars, of spirits that ride on the wind. Whether they believe the tales or not doesn't matter. In a place this vast, even silence needs mythology. Scientists say the Sahara's slumber won't last forever. The earth is still tilting, still wobbling. One day, perhaps in 10 or 15,000 years, the monsoon will drift north again. The rains will return, the dunes will crumble, grass will take root where now there is only dust. The Sahara will wake up, and when it does, it will reveal what it's been keeping. The rivers will carve through ancient beds again, uncovering the bones of people who lived and laughed long before the first pyramid rose. Fossils, tools, and forgotten cities will emerge blinking into the light, like memories surfacing after a long dream. Until then, it sleeps, not as a graveyard, but as a vault, a library of everything the earth has been, sealed under sand, waiting for the next chapter to begin. The Sahara is not gone. It's only resting, dreaming of rain, of green horizons, and of the people who once called it paradise. And if you stand at its edge at dusk, when the wind dies and the world turns gold, you can almost hear it breathing, the soft, patient exhale of a desert that remembers everything but says nothing. Nomads crossing its dunes still tell stories of strange lights and ancient wells. Maybe they're only mirages, or maybe the land itself remembers. If you listen closely in the Sahara, not with your ears, but with that quiet, primal part of your mind. You'll swear the desert is whispering. It's not wind, not really. It's something older, softer, more deliberate. The sand shifts in sighs and murmurs, like it's trying to tell you about the world it used to be. The lakes, the trees, the laughter buried somewhere far below your feet. For centuries, travelers have crossed this sea of silence, following stars by night and dunes by day, and every one of them, from ancient traders to modern nomads, has heard the same thing: voices in the wind. Sometimes it's singing, sometimes it's the hum of drums, faint and far away. Sometimes it's footsteps, soft, steady, keeping pace beside your camel though you walk alone. The locals say it's the spirits of the green Sahara, the people who never left, who still wander through the dunes, searching for their rivers. The Tuareg have stories of Tinariwen, the spirits of the empty lands. They say these beings glow faintly at night, flickering like lanterns in the distance. Some travelers chase them, thinking they've found a campfire or an oasis, only to find nothing but sand and silence when they arrive. Others say the lights lead the lost to safety. You can never be sure which kind of spirit you're following until it's too late. Scientists, of course, have explanations. They'll tell you the lights are the result of bioluminescent gases released from decaying matter underground, or reflections from the stars bouncing off heat haze. Logical? Yes. But when you're standing alone in the middle of the desert night, surrounded by an ocean of blackness and gold, logic doesn't feel very convincing. The desert's darkness is too absolute, too alive for coincidence. The whispers aren't always supernatural. Sometimes they come from the earth itself. The dunes sing, literally. Certain types of sand, when dry and fine enough, vibrate in harmony as they slide down slopes. It creates a low, resonant hum, a deep, eerie sound that rolls across the landscape like the voice of something enormous and invisible. Marco Polo wrote about it in the 13th century, calling it the singing sands. The Bedouins have a different explanation. It's the breath of the earth dreaming. And then there are the wells. The desert is full of them, some ancient, some forgotten, some that seem to appear out of nowhere after storms. The nomads say that some wells were dug by giants, others by angels. Some are bottomless, others are cursed. But every well is sacred, because water in the desert is more than survival. It's salvation. The Tuareg sometimes pour a little milk into the first bucket drawn, a quiet offering to whatever spirit still guards the depth below. Even the animals seem to respect the unseen. Camels, usually stubborn and unbothered, have been known to halt without warning, refusing to move forward. Their riders will say, "The old ones are passing." The desert, they believe, has moods. It doesn't like to be crossed carelessly. There's poetry in the way the Sahara holds its mysteries. You can walk across a flat plain for hours and suddenly find yourself standing on the edge of something ancient, a slab of stone, a shard of pottery, the rim of a buried wall. The wind uncovers these things and then hides them again, as if it's teasing us. A reminder that history is alive, but only for those who pay attention. And maybe that's why the nomads keep telling their stories. Because in a place this vast, silence is dangerous. You talk, you sing, you tell tales, not just to stay sane, but to remind the desert that you too are alive. You remind it that you belong there, even if only for a moment, before it decides to bury your footprints like it has everyone else's. So when you hear those whispers in the sand, don't be too quick to dismiss them. Maybe it's the wind, maybe it's your imagination, or maybe it's the earth remembering itself, murmuring in the only language it has left. Because the Sahara isn't empty. It's full of echoes, full of memory, full of all the stories that time tried and failed to erase. And if you're very quiet, the desert will whisper one back to you, but only once. After that, it will go silent again, keeping its secrets, as it always has, until someone else dares to listen. Today, as the climate shifts again, rain has begun to fall in parts long barren. The desert occasionally blooms, a brief reminder of what it once was before everything went wrong. Every few years, the Sahara wakes up, just for a moment. It doesn't happen often, and it never lasts long, but when it does, the transformation is breathtaking. The dunes darken with moisture, the air grows heavy with the scent of rain, and what was once endless gold turns a temporary green. Grasses burst through the sand like old memories rising from the dead, and for a few fleeting weeks, the world's largest desert remembers it was once a garden. It usually begins with a storm, not a drizzle, a downpour. Lightning forks across the horizon, thunder rolls like drums echoing off invisible walls, and rain falls with a sound the desert hasn't heard in years. At first the dunes resist, the water sizzling on hot sand. Then the surface softens, the grains cling together, and rivulets begin to form. Tiny streams, then shallow rivers, tracing the paths of waterways that have been dry for millennia. Satellite images confirm what the desert itself has always known. The old rivers never really disappeared. They're still there, carved deep into the Earth's crust, waiting. Scientists call them paleo-channels, ancient drainage systems that once fed the Green Sahara. The biggest of them, the Taman Rasset River, stretches for hundreds of miles beneath Mauritania and Algeria, its ghostly course still visible from space. When rare storms hit, water races through these channels again, as if the Earth itself is trying to remember how to breathe. In 2018, a French satellite captured something extraordinary, a massive underground reservoir beneath the sands of Libya and Chad, holding enough water to fill the Great Lakes. It's called the Nubian Aquifer, and it's one of the largest freshwater reserves on the planet, a relic of the old monsoon. The water there is ancient, tens of thousands of years old, trapped when the Sahara still bloomed. In a strange twist of fate, modern civilization now drills into those buried rivers to sustain itself, drawing life from the veins of a dead world. But nature, ever cyclical, seems to be stirring again. The planet is warming, the climate shifting, and the monsoon, that old, fickle friend, has begun creeping north once more. In southern Algeria, Mali, and Niger, grass is returning to valleys that haven't seen green in centuries. Crops are being planted in places once abandoned. Locals talk of the desert retreating. And for a moment it feels like history is rewinding. The animals respond first. Birds migrate deeper into the desert. Frogs, yes, frogs, have been found in temporary pools that form after sudden rain. Even crocodiles, long thought extinct in the Sahara, have been spotted in isolated desert oases in Mauritania. It's as if the ghosts of the Green Sahara are stirring, testing the air, to see if it's safe to come back. Of course, it's not all good news. The same climate shifts that bring rain to one region bring drought to another. The Sahara's return to green could destabilize weather patterns across Africa, altering monsoons and threatening regions that depend on predictable seasons. But there's something poetic, almost karmic, in the idea that the desert might one day undo itself, that the sands could give way to soil again, that the rivers could run where bones now lie. You can imagine it, a traveler, centuries from now, standing on a hillside in what used to be the empty quarter, looking down at a valley full of trees, herds grazing, water shimmering in the sun, the ruins of old oases standing proud again, the tombs, the wells, the rock art of dancing figures once more surrounded by rain. If the Sahara does bloom again, it won't just be an environmental event. It'll be the Earth's greatest resurrection, a return of memory, a reminder that no matter how final change feels, nature never truly forgets what it once was. The rivers beneath the sand are patient. They've been waiting for 10,000 years. And maybe, just maybe, the next chapter of their story has already begun, with the first drop of rain striking the skin of a dune, and the desert, half asleep, whispering softly to itself, I remember. Genetic studies trace human migrations back through this region. The Green Sahara was a cradle of people, our ancestors. We all carry a little desert dust in our blood. The Sahara wasn't just a landscape, it was a womb, the place where humanity learned to walk, to adapt, to survive. Long before it became a desert, it was one of the great crossroads of prehistory, where early humans mixed, migrated, and dreamed beneath skies that were full of rain and stars. It's almost poetic to think that what is now a wasteland once held the DNA of everyone alive today. Every laugh, every heartbeat, every thought that's ever existed, all of it carries the echo of that vanished green world. Scientists have known for decades that Africa is the birthplace of humanity, but recent genetic evidence shows something deeper. The Green Sahara wasn't just a route out of Africa. It was a thriving home, a superhighway of migration and connection. When the desert was alive, it linked the continent like a living bridge. Populations from East, West, and North Africa mingled here, trading not only goods but genes, stories, and ideas. It's hard to picture, but in those days the Sahara wasn't a barrier. It was a corridor of lakes, forests, and grasslands, a land that stretched wide and welcoming between the Mediterranean and sub-Saharan Africa. Think of it as an ancient crossroads where cultures met before cultures even had names. The DNA evidence supports it. Traces of ancient Saharan ancestry can be found in everyone from the Berbers of North Africa to the Bedouin of Arabia, from the peoples of the Nile to even modern Europeans. The genes of the Green Sahara travel farther than any caravan ever could. At sites like Gobero in Niger and Takakori in Libya, scientists have uncovered skeletons of men, women, and children whose genetic signatures bridge entire continents. One study revealed that these early Saharans shared ancestry with both Central African foragers and Mediterranean coastal peoples, proof that this desert was once a place of constant movement and exchange. In other words, it wasn't isolation that defined us, but connection. And that connection still hums quietly inside you. Every strand of human DNA carries a record of journeys taken and landscapes crossed. When researchers map the migrations of our species, from Africa into the Middle East, from there into Asia, Europe, and beyond, the trails always pass through the same forgotten corridor, the Green Sahara. Long before there were roads, there were rivers of blood and bone flowing through a land that no longer exists. You could say the Sahara lives inside us, not as geography, but as memory. Maybe that's why we're so drawn to stories of paradise lost. The Garden of Eden, Atlantis, Dilmun, the land of Punt. Every civilization seems haunted by the same idea, that once, long ago, the earth was kinder. Maybe we keep telling that story because deep in our DNA, we remember what it felt like to live in that green world. It's humbling to realize that the sand we now see as lifeless once shaped the very biology of our species. The same ground that cracks underfoot today is the ground that once cradled the first footprints of humanity's ancestors. The same sky that scorches by day once shone softly on herds, rivers, and families who laughed and sang where now there is only wind. Every handful of Saharan sand holds a fossilized record of life, pollen, shells, bones, and perhaps in a more abstract way, us. Because while the desert may have buried its paradise, it couldn't bury its legacy. Our bodies, our faces, our very capacity to adapt are proof that we came from a place that refused to stay the same. And perhaps that's the truest inheritance of all, not just the genetic memory of where we come from, but the resilience to endure change, to evolve when the rains stop, to move when the rivers vanish, to start again when paradise becomes sand. So the next time you look at a map and see that vast, empty stretch labeled Sahara, remember this: it isn't empty. It's a graveyard of ancestors, a cathedral of beginnings. The dust that fills the air there is not lifeless. It's ancient DNA, still moving, still traveling, still finding its way into lungs, oceans, and hearts all over the world. We are all, in the quietest and most literal sense, children of the Sahara. The desert may have forgotten its rivers, but the rivers still flow through us. If the Sahara really was Eden, then maybe the story of humanity's fall isn't just moral, it's meteorological. Paradise wasn't lost through sin, but through climate collapse. Imagine this: Eden wasn't a place of magic fruit and talking snakes, but of green valleys and endless rain, a world so generous that it spoiled us. Rivers rolled through the heart of Africa, trees stretched for miles, animals grazed under skies heavy with thunder. Humanity thrived, and then the weather changed, slowly at first, then suddenly, and one day, paradise began to die. That's the uncomfortable truth buried under our myths. The story of Eden isn't about temptation, it's about survival. The first humans to watch their world dry up didn't just lose a home, they lost certainty itself. Every sunrise brought less rain, fewer fish, hungrier children. What do you call that, if not the first apocalypse? And what do people do when the sky stops keeping its promises? They tell stories. Those stories became the foundation of human culture. The tale of a paradise lost, a fall from grace, a punishment we didn't understand but had to live with. But maybe there was no apple, no serpent, just a monsoon that shifted a few hundred miles south, a wobble in Earth's orbit, a change so small that no one could have stopped it, yet so vast that it reshaped everything. In that way, the Sahara isn't just ancient history, it's a prophecy, the first warning of what happens when the balance between land, water, and sky collapses. The people who lived there adapted, moved, rebuilt, but their paradise never returned. The lakes that once fed empires turned to dust. The green plains became gold dunes, and humanity, for the first time, learned that the earth does not negotiate. Archaeologists find the evidence everywhere: desiccated riverbeds, dried fish fossils, pollen trapped in lake mud that hasn't seen water in 7,000 years. The Sahara's transformation wasn't a storm or a single event. It was a slow-motion extinction, one that unfolded over centuries while humans watched helplessly. Whole generations were born and died under skies that grew less forgiving each year, and yet they kept hoping for the rain to come back. If there's something poetic and tragic about this story, it's how familiar it feels. Because we're living through a similar moment now. Rising temperatures, shifting weather, collapsing ecosystems, all the same ingredients that once turned the green Sahara into a desert. The difference is that now we know what's coming. And still we act surprised when the earth begins to speak in droughts and floods. Maybe that's the real lesson of the Sahara. That paradise is fragile, and loss is always closer than we think. The people of the green Sahara didn't destroy their world through greed or malice. They didn't burn forests or poison rivers. Nature simply moved on, as it always does. But we're not innocent wanderers anymore. We know what we're doing to the sky. We know what the cost will be. The Sahara's story isn't just a tragedy. It's a mirror. It shows us who we are when the environment changes faster than we can adapt. It reminds us that civilizations don't fall in a day. They fade, one harvest at a time, one dry season after another, until no one remembers what rain used to sound like. Maybe that's why the myth of Eden endures. It's not nostalgia for a perfect past. It's a warning that we keep ignoring. Every generation retells it in their own way. The flood, the drought, the exile, the fire. Different endings, same message. The paradise we lose is always the one we thought would last forever. If you stand on the edge of the Sahara today and close your eyes, you can almost hear it, the sound of wind moving across a landscape that once bloomed. The desert doesn't accuse, it doesn't weep, it just exists, vast and silent. A reminder carved in gold, everything beautiful can disappear if we stop paying attention. So maybe Eden wasn't a myth after all, maybe it was a memory and a warning, a story written not in scripture, but in sand. And if we listen closely, we might still hear its last whisper, don't make the same mistake twice. And now the Sahara is a vast graveyard of time. Beneath every dune lies a fossil, a painting, or a secret. The Garden of Eden may not have vanished. It may just be sleeping under 6 million square miles of sand. Stand at the edge of the Sahara, and it feels eternal. A kingdom of silence stretching endlessly toward the horizon. The dunes roll like waves frozen in mid-motion. The air flickers with heat, and the light is so sharp it seems to carve the world in half. But beneath that perfection lies chaos, a buried archive of everything the earth has ever been. The Sahara isn't just a desert, it's a memory made visible. Every grain of sand here has a story. Some once formed the bed of a lake where crocodiles swam. Some were riverbanks where families fished and built fires. Others were mountains crushed over millennia into dust by wind and time. The desert looks empty, but it's heavy, heavy with the weight of all it's seen. The fossils beneath its dunes tell of an age when hippos bathed, elephants wandered, and humans painted their dreams on rock walls. And the rocks still whisper those dreams back to us. In the caves of Tassili Najjar and Gilf Kabir, you can still see them, hunters, dancers, and gods drawn in ochre and white. Some figures are surrounded by spirals, others by lines that seem to represent stars or rain. The people who painted them are long gone, but their hands are still visible in negative prints on the stone, human signatures older than most mountains. You could press your palm to the same spot and for a moment touch someone who lived 8,000 years ago. Archaeologists call this prehistory, but it feels more intimate than history, less about kings and wars, more about hope and survival. Each artifact unearthed beneath the sand, a shell bracelet, a pottery shard, a child's grave, is a piece of a vanished world. Together they tell a story that feels too big to be fiction and too fragile to be forgotten. The irony is that the desert, the great eraser, has also been the great archivist. Its dryness preserves what wetter climates destroy. Wooden tools, textiles, even footprints have been found intact. Time doesn't decay things here, it pauses them. The Sahara is a museum with no walls, one that hides its exhibits under miles of dust, waiting for the wind to curate. And yet there's a haunting quality to this preservation, because what the desert keeps, it also isolates. These fossils and ruins don't just tell us what happened, they remind us how much has been lost. For every discovery unearthed, 1,000 more remain buried, perhaps forever. A necklace here, a footprint there, enough to prove that life once thrived, but never enough to reconstruct the whole. It's like finding torn pages of a masterpiece that you'll never get to read in full. Still, the Sahara gives just enough to keep us wondering. Every few years, a new expedition uncovers something that shifts the story. Again, another clue that paradise was real. A riverbed no one knew existed, a burial more intricate than it should be, a carving of an animal extinct for 10,000 years. Each revelation feels like the desert blinking, as if deciding whether or not to show us what it dreams about. And perhaps that's the point. The Sahara doesn't want to be solved, it wants to be remembered. It's the Earth's way of reminding us that time doesn't move in straight lines. It folds, buries, and resurfaces. One day, what's forgotten will rise again, just as the sand that buries a fossil today will one day erode and set it free. So maybe Eden isn't gone. Maybe it's simply buried, not lost but waiting. A seed under 6 million square miles of sand, biding its time until the world tilts once more and the rains return. When that day comes, the Sahara will bloom again, and the ghosts of the green Sahara, its people, its animals, its gods, will rise from the earth in the form of rivers and grass. Until then, the desert sleeps. But even in sleep, it remembers. Every gust of wind reshapes its face. Every grain of sand carries a fragment of the past. The Sahara may have turned from garden to grave, but it remains stubbornly, beautifully alive, not in water or trees, but in memory, because paradise doesn't die. It simply waits to be rediscovered.